What is your advice to our listeners to get through this pandemic?
Stay calm, try to minimize contact where you can, and wait until we have the vaccine program in place. The basic truth in a pandemic is that if you don't have a cure and you don't have a vaccine, it will continue to spread through any population that doesn't have natural immunity. So it will continue to spread. The good news is that there is going to be the vaccine available in the new year, so at least we've got something to look forward to positively in public health in 2021, even if it won't be an instant solution.
And folks, there is your free doctor's appointment of the day. Not that Liam Fox has ever done that. Minister, if we could move forward to, I should say, Trade Secretary, if we could move forward to these huge changes we see, how should the United Kingdom adapt and adjust to the Biden administration?
Well, of course, we don't really know what the picture will be. It looks as though President-elect Biden's picking a fairly mainstream team for the US with experience. And of course, there is still the situation where there is a split Congress, which won't be a change. So in terms of where the UK sits, we will be looking forward to an administration that is committed to multilateral institutions. We need reform of those multilateral institutions, and having a constructive US input would be helpful in that, from the WTO through to the World Bank and the IMF and beyond.
But Dr. Fox, does Biden's election mean that Boris Johnson can no longer realistically leave the single market at the end of the year without a deal?
Well, I think we will get a deal. I've always believed we would get a deal, and my belief in that has got stronger, because I think that not only is there an imperative for both the United Kingdom and the European Union to seek it for economic reasons, but I think that in the global situation at the moment, the post-pandemic global economy, there is a need for confidence to be stimulated. And I think that getting a EU trade agreement would be one way to provide that. So I think there's almost an obligation on both parties that go beyond their own self-interest.
Is Joe Biden correct to draw a link between the internal market bill and the Good Friday Agreement?
No, I don't think so. Not as directly as has been said. But hopefully, of course, there is no need for us to have the European market bill anyway. It does look from the signals we're getting as though progress is being made on the Brexit settlement. My experience says that when we get into effectively a news blackout where no one is saying anything at all, that's the time when they're looking at texts. That seems to be the indication from a little slip from the Irish Prime Minister. So I think that if the only areas where there was any real difference was over state aid and fishing, those are issues that can be bridged.
Mr. Fox, I want to talk about the idea, the core concept here, and we do this with American exceptionalism, that there can be British exceptionalism. What is British exceptionalism in 2021?
Well, I've never really agreed with some people's concept of American exceptionalism. My view is that American exceptionalism exists to the extent that the institutions and the Constitution of the United States and the commitment to enterprise and a free market allows ordinary people to do exceptional things. I think it's really about the system. And in the United Kingdom, I think it's the same challenge that we face in most Western countries. How do we get governments off the back of the people? How do we get a free market, free enterprise system operating in a way that we can use our natural innovation and creativity? So I also think that we need more commitment to multilateral institutions. We've had a lot of talk about regional trade agreements and bilateral trade agreements. Actually, we are much better to be looking for multilateral trade agreements. We haven't really had one through the WTO, apart from the trade facilitation agreement, since 1995. It's time that we pushed on that. And if we can't get that to move forward, then we need to look for plurilateral agreements, coalitions of the willing, who are genuinely market economies, willing to take forward greater trade liberalization, because therein lies the route to opportunity and prosperity.
We're just hearing from Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, of course, of the United Kingdom, talking about the OBR forecast on the UK economy, making for a sober reading. He's briefing the cabinet right now, and this is ahead, of course, of the spending review. OBR statistics show the scale of the UK contraction and the scale of debt increase. This is according to the Chancellor. But Liam Fox, let me go back to the deal that you're expecting between the UK and the EU. Is there a danger that Boris Johnson will give too much into the EU to get the deal at any cost? And are there any circumstances in which you and your colleagues would actually not back a deal that the Prime Minister would bring back?
Well, if you'll excuse me, there were just rather too many ifs in that question. I've always taken the view that you need to get a trade agreement. There have to be some compromises. A trade agreement is not a take it or leave it ultimatum. It's a trade-off. And that's what you expect to get. And we will look at it, I think, very favorably. I think it's unlikely to see Boris Johnson giving away too much to the European Union. I imagined from the very beginning that both sides would fight and negotiate very hard in all of these areas. And I think that from what we can tell, and I'm not in a more privileged position than anyone else, I think that we're in the landing zone for an agreement. So as I said, I think it's not only to the benefit of both parties, but I think it provides welcome confidence at a time when it's in short supply in the global economy.
What are your red lines?
Well, clearly, one of the reasons that we're leaving the European Union is that we don't want to have the European Court determining what happens in the United Kingdom. So that has to be an area where our sovereignty is protected. I think for most other things, we've seen an agreement in broad areas that we want to see a tariff-free trading zone, that we'll want to see lower costs across the trading network. We don't want to see the introduction of new paperwork and new transactional costs in the economy. So I do think that there is goodwill. And I think that perhaps the COVID emergency has concentrated minds to say, we don't need to have any more variables out there. We need to deal with the global emergency and minimize those other issues that are out there too. And then I think that the European Union and the UK will find quite a degree of commonality in how they see the global trading position, the sort of things that they want in terms of liberalization of services, the need to get some of those big agreements over the line, and then to look at things like an environmental goods agreement so that we can start to align policies on things like climate change with trade policy. And then we'll have the big challenge of the effect on COVID on the developing world with diminished demand from the G20, having an impact potentially on commodity prices, tougher employment circumstances, meaning fewer remittances. And I think we have to be slightly wary of whether we might be tipping one or two of those developing countries towards debt default. And of course, that's where we need to come in on the other side through the World Bank and the IMF.